Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about being a specialist versus being an all-rounder. Now, first off, what do I mean when I say this? I'm talking about WCA events and how much you practice each of them. So a specialist is someone who focuses primarily on one event, and an all-rounder is someone who focuses on a lot or all of the events. I fit squarely in the specialist category, specialising heavily in pyraminx. I have a 1.8 average in competition, and while my other events aren't bad, they aren't good.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man.
So in this video, I'll be talking about the pros and cons of each approach, and how you can make your decision. I'll also be including some other people's views on this, so that you can have multiple perspectives from both specialists and all-rounders' point of view. So let's get started. In my mind, the biggest pro of being a specialist is that you get impressive results earlier. In terms of stuff like competition podiums and wins, as well as impressive national and world rankings, it's just faster to get this as a specialist. I know people who are better than me at every event except for pyraminx, but because they haven't focused a lot on one event, they haven't got a podium at a competition. If you're looking to win a competition, get a national record, stuff like that, it's much easier to do this as a specialist. However, this also comes with its downsides. Because you are focusing on one event, that one event can make or break how well a competition goes for you. This means that you're going to be a lot more nervous for your event than other competitors. You see all-rounders get below their global average in competition a lot, whereas this rarely happens to specialists, and this is down to nerves. The next point I'll talk about is how both approaches affect your development as a cuber, and I think there is one advantage of both of these approaches. For all-rounding, the big benefit is that you practice events that help build skills for other events. Practicing any N by N or blind event will help improve your turning on all of those events, as well as improving look ahead and efficiency skills for loads of other events. This happens a lot less when you're a specialist, especially if you main a side event. For specialising, the main benefit is when you start trying to improve at other events other than your main event. This is a bit of a confusing point to get across, but basically, when you start practicing event, you pick up habits, often bad ones, that you have to relearn later. If you get really good at one event before starting to seriously practice another, you're less likely to pick up bad habits when you start that new event, as you have a better understanding of the type of things you shouldn't be doing. This means you won't have to change as much if you eventually decide you want to get really good at that event. I don't think one way is necessarily better than the other, but being an all-rounder definitely gives you that overall improvement more quickly, so it's just something to take into account. The last point I'll talk about is how much you enjoy different events, and this isn't really a pro or con for either approach. For me, pyraminx is by far my favourite event, so I practice that the most. Being a specialist is what makes me enjoy cubing the most, so that's what I do. However, for some people, they like the variety of being an all-rounder, so they do that instead. Really, it's just personal preference, and a decision that oftentimes you just naturally make. The other thing to consider is that being a specialist versus being an all-rounder is not a difference that has to be black and white. Obviously, all-rounders still have events that they main, and obviously specialists still practice events other than their main, but I do think it is a difference you should consider. But enough of what I think. You need some other perspectives on this. So next up, we have some all-rounders and specialists from the UK cubing community to talk to you about this issue.
What's up guys, my name's Luke. I am the UK national record holder for 2x2 average, with an average of 1.27 seconds. I'm going to give some thoughts on all-rounders and specialists in the WCA. So the main thing I think that affects people deciding whether they kind of want to become an all-rounder or a specialist is time investment. If you want to invest a lot more time, or if you're able to, then you can obviously practice a lot more events to a better standard. Unfortunately, I've not been able to invest quite as much time into cubing as I might have liked, so I've only managed to get good at a certain number of events, which in my case is square one, clock, and 2x2. And I've also somewhat got okay at 3x3 along the way. One thing with being a specialist is people sometimes talk about nemesis, which is where someone in the WCA is better than you at every single event with single and average. So it's much easier to unnemesize them if you are better at multiple events, obviously. So that's one benefit to being an all-rounder over a specialist, or else you'd have to get like world record or something, which is obviously quite difficult being world record. So if that's something you would be quite serious about, that might be something to consider if you want to invest more time and be an all-rounder over a specialist cuber. Another reason I have for being a specialist is that you can get more easily noticed by cube stores and that can potentially sponsor you. For example, I know a couple of people who I would say are all-rounders, which haven't got particularly great results in a specific event, or aren't like top 50 in the world, for example. They're not as noticed as much, so they aren't offered the sponsorships, etc., etc. So that might be something else to consider if you're planning to become an all-rounder. And that rounds up my thoughts on all-rounders and specialists in the WCA. Thanks for listening.
Well, I'm Harvie and I'm an all-rounder. I'm currently ranked top 30 in the UK for some of ranks. And I'm just going to be kind of putting my points forward as to why I believe that all-rounding is overall a better strategy for competing as opposed to just focusing on one event. Mainly being that the competitions are high-pressure environments and it's very, very easy to let nerves affect you. And if you have one event and that event is your whole focus of the comp and that event goes bad, the rest of the competition doesn't really matter. You don't have as much of a focus. Whereas if you have every single event of that comp that you care about and you go forward and you make a mistake in one of your events, because it happens to us all with nerves, you make a mistake in one event, the next event is still important and you still have to try very, very hard. And ultimately, when it comes to it having only one event is going to limit your abilities to rank high in things like Hinch and some of ranks or any other stats you may care about. You're only going to have one ranking that's going to be particularly high or particularly impressive. The only real difficulty around being an all-rounder is overall the skill level needed is very high and a lot of time investment to be good at so many events. Um, Personally, I focus more on N by N events, so there's a kind of small pool of those I focus on. But ultimately, I want to be good at all of the events, and it takes a lot of time because if you spend a lot of time trying to focus on one event, like clock, for example, and you spend a whole week focusing on clock, whatever you did last week kind of feels a little bit void. So it definitely you focus so much on one event that other events start to drop, and you try and keep all the events above a certain level, which is definitely very difficult. So that's probably the biggest struggle is the stress of trying to maintain a decent ranking in all your events. But ultimately, I think it is worth it because grinding stats like some of ranks and Kinch is definitely is for me, it's a more impressive achievement. And watching it after every comp go up and up and up because you're breaking PRs and whatnot. And another point as well, to be fair, is your PR streak is much easier to maintain because you've got multiple chances to do it in. But overall, that's just my thoughts on being an all rounder as opposed to being a specialist.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Jake, and today I'm going to be talking about all-rounding versus specialising in cubing. So a quick intro for me. I've always done lots of events because I've enjoyed the variety, but around about 4 or 5 years ago I started maining 5x5. I've also always done 3x3 very frequently, so I consider those two my main events. So earlier this year I realised that I wanted to dedicate more time and effort into being an all-rounder, because having been a specialiser for the last few years, I don't think it's been working out as well as I'd hoped. I hadn't found it as rewarding as I'd want it to be, given the effort I'd put in. I have had some excellent results in 5x5 and 3x3 in competition, but given how much time I've put in, I think it took a lot of repeated competing and a lot of not as good results to get to where I am now. For example, in the last year, it's taken me over 5 months to drop my 5x5 PR average from 1 minute 0.85 seconds to under 1 minute. And I think it's a lot easier to burn yourself out from doing 1 or 2 events compared to all rounding. So that's definitely something to think about. If you do want to specialise, then you should be prepared for a while to get worse than average results in that event and for it to be demoralising. Also, there was a video a while back from Jaden McNeil talking about something similar to this. Talking about his 4.97 cube drop. And he mentioned in the video that in a lot of cases in the past, when he's had bad results in certain events, he's been able to make up with it by getting decent results in other events. And I think that's definitely something that can happen if you're an all-rounder. Whereas if you specialise, that's a lot harder to do. So I think if you do specialise, be wary that you will have to deal with bad results and then not have necessarily a way of making up for it. But I think the main thing I want to mention in this video is it matters a lot how you practice. I think if you just enjoy solving for fun, which I do most of the time, then I think you'll find that all-rounding is a lot more enjoyable because it gives you that variety. And if there's an event that you don't feel like doing, you can pick something completely different and not feel like you're just solving for the sake of it. However, I think if you care about improvement and really getting faster and dedicating yourself to cubing, then you could find it very rewarding to specialise. But I think whatever you do, if you care about improvement, then you need to be doing specific targeted practice wherever possible. And so I'll give you an example of this. Earlier this year, I started practicing pyramids quite a lot. I went from globing around 5.5 seconds without having a single sub-2 solve ever to globing under 4 seconds and having a 2.39 average of 5 in just a few months. And actually, when I spoke to Ed about making this video in the first place, I said I didn't have particularly great official results in my main event, but I'd be happy to talk about specialising anyway, because it's something I have done. And he said he actually assumed that my main event was pyramids because those were my best official results rather than 5x5. And I think that speaks a lot to what I mentioned earlier. So what I did with pyramids was I began filming my solves and watching them back to work out how to improve. And that's the key to targeted practice. You work out what your mistakes are, where you can improve, and then act on those specifically, which is obviously a really good thing to do, but you need to be as specific as possible. For example, when I was doing pyramids, I realised that my tips were really hindering my solve. And I knew they were very slow, and I needed to work out how to fix that. And it's all very well saying, okay, I'll just make my tips faster. But you need to know how to improve on it. So I filmed my solves, watched them back, and realised that, firstly, I was doing my tips in the wrong point in the solve. A lot of the time I'd do like a couple at the start, then do a few moves, whatever, and then do more at the end or even in the middle of the solve. And that was a very bad thing to be doing. That was very slow. And actually, I think it was one of Ed's videos that I watched in the end. And he mentioned that generally for most people, it's best to do all of the tips at the start of the solve. And so I thought, okay, I'll try that. And then the next thing to work on from there was learning how to do more than one tip at once. So if, say, you wanted to do your tips from this angle, instead of doing a couple of moves and then like a rotation to do the one at the back, what you can learn to do instead is solve multiple tips at once in the same sort of movement with your hand. And that gives yourself a better flow. So it's things like that. You need to go as far as possible to determine what you're doing wrong or not optimally, and then work out how to fix that. Other things I did included drilling my L4E algs, learning the most efficient ones because I didn't use all of the most efficient ones, and also fixing my finger tricks and being able to turn accurately before I tried turning quickly. All of that added up and gave me a lot of improvement really quickly in the end. And all of this made me realise that when I'm doing 5x5 or 3x3 or any event that I like, largely these two, I often fall into a bit of a mental trap because I know I've always enjoyed these events the most. 5x5 is definitely my favourite event. But what that's caused to happen is me sort of falling into a trap of just doing solves because I enjoy the event and I like doing solves. But that is definitely not the fastest way to improve. But then I would get frustrated when I couldn't do as well as I thought I should be able to, with how much time I was spending. But what I didn't really realise until quite recently is that a lot of my effort was going into the wrong place. Instead of just doing solves, if you want to specialise, you should do targeted practice. But ultimately, I think you should aim to do whatever you find the most fun. I think there is something in cubing that all of us inherently find quite fun, which is why we're still doing it. And also, you're only doing it for yourself, so you don't have to commit to anything. So if you are an all-rounder and you fancy trying specialising, go for it. Definitely try it, see if it works. And if it doesn't, you can go back to being an all-rounder. You don't have to commit to it. But yeah, so those are my quick thoughts on specialising versus all-rounding. Thanks so much to Ed for very kindly letting me contribute to this video, and I really hope it was useful and helpful for all of you. So thanks for watching.